Yo, check, check, check. Check, check, check. Let's go. What's up, y'all? Check, check, check. Check, check, check. Microphone check. What's up, y'all? Shouts out to everybody here on a nice Tuesday. We're doing a little Tuesday streaming. We're doing a little day streaming. It's called a little day streaming. Sometimes we do a little day streaming. Today we're covering Heat 2 by Michael Mann. Michael Mann, the great Michael Mann. We're covering the recently released sort of sequel. I guess it's a sequel. It's the novel version, the prose version. It's novelized version of Michael Mann's follow-up to the great 1995 film Heat with Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Val killing it, and all those great characters. All right, so look, I know my mic is kind of avant-garde here, as who said that? David last time. The mic is kind of avant-garde here, but we're doing the best we can because no matter where I put it, like I bump into it and hit it. So I'm trying to do the best I can here, folks. All right, so what's up, y'all? Today we're covering Heat 2 by Michael Mann. The novel was just recently published. I just got it and tore through it. It's a 500-page book. Tore through it. I guess pretty much yesterday afternoon and evening. And I gotta say, you know, I was kind of skeptical of the book because the novel is such a great book. I'm just trying to fix my mic here. The novel's such a great book. Okay, now I'm straight. The movie is such a great movie. The 1995 film by Michael Mann is such a great film that I was a little skeptical of the novel being a sequel. He's also got this, not a ghostwriter, I mean, he's got a co-writer. But I got to say, I was pretty impressed. And that's not just because I'm a huge fan of Heat. In fact, look, people, I don't know. I mean, yes, we're going to be doing a deep analysis of the film and the book today. And we're not doing book club. We're not doing movie club. And I'm not simply, fanning over the movie. But I got to say, the movie is so great. Yes, I'm going to put my personal feelings into it. It's a great fucking movie. Excuse my language, folks. I know it's a Tuesday afternoon. I know we got a family audience. We really don't. But, I'll try and watch the language for the affiliates out there. But look, you guys, this is a great movie. And if you haven't seen the movie, what are you doing with your life? No, but seriously, it's one of the great movies. It's one of the great crime sagas of all time. Probably the great crime saga on film. I mean, it's such an amazing movie. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to deep dive into the film, what makes it a great film. But more specifically, we're going to be talking about the novel Heat 2 that just came out, which I just said it's kind of a sequel / prequel to the film. And there are some bits that I'm going to get into some of the criticisms that I have of the novel, but we're doing a critical analysis. So we're going to talk about what makes a crime novel, because we haven't really done that yet. We haven't really done crime novels here. We did a little bit of true crime, but mostly what we've done is canon literature, right? So I thought it would be an interesting sort of sidebar to go into a different literary genre, right? To go into something that's absolutely contemporary and current, something that is just recently published, some more prose. We haven't done verse in a little while, so we're going to go back to Shakespeare in a little bit. We've got some more prose to do coming up on the way. Shouts out to everybody out there. Cheers with your GMO drinks on my holiday. I'm on a little holiday here for a couple weeks. So we're going to be banging out the streams this week, hopefully. I mean, I've got some great content coming up. Great content. I mean, hopefully it'll be interesting to you guys, content. But we're going to be doing, after this, we're going to be doing The Giver. So we'll be doing some dystopian literature. And then, of course, I'll be getting into this Mammoth. It's Mammoth, but it's also, it's written for kids. And I read it when I was a kid. This fantasy series, The Chronicles of Prydain, which is kind of the American, not version of, not the antithesis to J.R.R. Tolkien. It's not trying to compete, I don't think. It's just a different fantasy, high fantasy version of the hero's journey. We'll also be going back into, what else do we have going soon? We've got, I plan on doing The Tempest because we've done so much Shakespeare here, and we gotta go into some of Shakespeare's tragicomedy. That sounds oxymoronic. It is, but Shakespeare's The Tempest, because of I think its relevance and especially its emphasis on the esoteric. So please, everybody, if you're here and especially if you're watching this later, thank you for being here, and please don't forget to smash the like, leave a comment down below. I appreciate the comments and the suggestions. If you want to sponsor a stream, send me a fat chat. My homeboys, my beautiful mods, my homeboy Jeff especially is dropping those links in the chat. You can support me. I had some huge support last time. Thank you so much to everybody who supported me out there. Really appreciate you. I plan on going down south next week, down to Mississippi if I can make it. Be driving that 1,000 miles, so I can really use that. So I really appreciate you. Really appreciate all of your generosity and kindness out there to all my friends. So let's dive into it. Let's dive into Heat 2. So what happens in the novel? Let's give a narrative breakdown first. What happens in the plot? Well, you if you know Heat 1995, of course, I'm gonna sort of interweave the two narratives because they're interwoven within the structure of the novel and the film. And one reason that Michael Mann did this, I think, is because his characterization, and one reason that the film is so great is because his characterization runs so deep in the film. In other words, the characters are three-dimensional. You know, they are not flat. They have histories. You care about them. You care about them for better or worse. And we get that fleshed out in the novel because we see what happens to Chris Shiherlis, who's played by Val Kilmer in the original film. What happens to him because he's the one who survives the LA takedown, right? Of course, LA takedown is the name of the original film that Michael Mann wrote that Heat remade, right? He made a film, then he remade it as Heat. And we're going to be talking also about a lot of the aesthetics in the film, which carry over into the novel really well. In fact, I think that it's perfect that we're doing this now because it's kind of a follow-up to one of the streams that we did recently, which is Don DeLeo's White Noise. That was a great prerequisite for this book. And that may seem a little bit out there, right? Because we get a work of, Penn Faulkner Award winning, National Book Award nominated, Nobel Prize nominated Don DeLeo's work of postmodern malaise. But that plays into Heat, and the reason it plays into it is because there's one line that in the movie that really struck me. It's when Al Pacino says, "Your ex-husband's postmodern dead tech bullshit." Right? You remember he says that, and that line, I think was probably my first introduction to the term postmodern when it came out in 1995. I mean, I was 15 years old, but it really, that line stuck with me, and so that plays into the Don DeLeo book because a lot of the idea of like this sort of ionization or the electricity or an electrical current in the way characters move is certainly inherent in Vincent Hanna's character. That's Al Pacino, right? Because she got a great ass and you got your head all the way up it. Sorry if I broke your speakers right there. Yeah, we'll be doing plenty of cringe impressions. My best version of some of these. I got a woman. What are you, a monk? What's that, barbecues and ball games? Right? Yeah. Actually, it's De Niro who says that one. What's that, barbecues and ball games? Yeah, something like that. Right. So the book actually does a great version of carrying all of that sort of sense of a kind of a postmodern language through. Now, I'm not saying that. Now, in terms of the worldview, what Jethro said earbuds explode. Yeah, I'm sorry. Try to be better about that. So look, I'm not saying that, I agree with the worldview espoused in the novel, but it's one thing that's interesting is that there is a worldview in the novel. It's not just a novelized film or like a fan sequel, right? Or fan fiction. This is really carries the characters into new depths, new heights, and we get a backstory, which is one that I think if you know the film is one that you imagined anyway, but it's great to see it in words on the page, right? But there is a scene where we get Neil McCauley. Shouts out to Neil McCauley, our homeboy Orson out there. Hope he sees this. Our homeboy, our Chad nerd, homeboy Orson, aka Neil McCauley. Hope he sees this out there. But we do get a scene where Neil McCauley does talk about his worldview, and it's in the prequel section of the book. So the structure of the novel is essentially that it starts immediately after the LA takedown, which is the 1995 shootout in the film where the crew, Macaulay's crew, has robbed this bank. And Tom Sizemore, I always call him Tom Sizemore because I had this friend when I was a teenager who said his name was Tom Sizemore. So Tom Sizemore gets shot. Macaulay later gets shot. Remember, he dies at the end of the film in that great scene. Of course, Trejo, who's named after the actor Danny Trejo, who was also a real-life bank robber. He was one of the technical advisors on the film, and then he was hired as an actor, right? He was one of the characters. There are a bunch of other interesting elements of the film. I mean, the other technical advisors, if you didn't know this, for Heat were Andy McNabb and what's the other guy's name? Mick Gold. Andy McNabb was the SAS guy who was he wrote a book called Bravo 20, and he was in Desert Storm. And he's the one who trained all the actors in their gun work, their gunplay in the film. And it's really spectacular. I mean, one of the things I'll mention, I'm going to be doing a lot of tangents. So one of the things I'll mention is that one of the reasons that the movie works so well is not because it would be cheap to call it realism. It's not realism. It's a highly stylized, but based in a kind of a criminal reality that I think it certainly was missing at the time, but was highly influential in films. I mean, it's obvious that, for instance, Christopher Nolan copied a lot of this, especially for his opening sequence of The Dark Knight with the Joker, right? With the bank scene. That scene is kind of a mix of Die Hard with a Vengeance when they rob the Federal Reserve and Heat, right? And one of the things that makes it so stylized and works so well is that they didn't add the sounds of the gunfire in post-production. They actually, where'd my cigarettes go? Oh, there they are. They actually set up mics all in the streets of LA where they did the filming on location around LA. There weren't any sound stages used in the film. It was all on location, LA locations. And I mean, this is probably the most LA. This is one of the most LA films I can imagine. I haven't spent any time in LA, so I don't know personally. But when my idea of LA is informed by the movies, and of course this is the great LA bank robber film, along with my personal favorite, Point Break, right? So what he did was he set up mics all over the streets, and he recorded the sounds of the live gunfire, right? Which adds to the ambiance, and that sort of ambiance plays a major role in the prose work in the sequel. It's really amazing because you would think that wouldn't carry over. How would you carry over the aesthetics of the film into the novel? And of course, this is unusual because most novels, especially ones that are carried over from films, just don't work. But this one does. Now there are a couple of problems, but let's dive into it. So again, as I said, the story begins with Chris Shirless Val killing it immediately after the LA takedown, and he's the sort of lone survivor. He goes for surgery. He's been shot through the clavicle, and it's missed a major artery. And he goes where he's fixed up by a vet in the crew's pay or in their employ, which is played by Jeremy Piven from Ari Gold, right? PCU, Jeremy Piven. And give me your shirt. My daughter, I don't give a shit. Give me the shirt, right? And he's sort of fixed up crudely. Then he meets up with Nate, played by John Voight. John Voight's character in the film is actually based on the guy who is in, I can't remember his name, but he is the older crime boss guy who was a real life crime guy, real life armed robber, who plays a role in Reservoir Dogs. You remember that guy? That old crusty dude, sort of hard gangster. Anyway, that's who Nate is based on. Nate's got his slick back hair, his bolo ties. John Voight looking kind of skeezy, but hard, right? And he has a club called the Blue Room where he bases his, it's his sort of base of operations in L.A., seedy bar. And then Nate sets him up with a plane. He gets him out of town. He gets him out of L.A. They fly to Mexico. Then they fly sort of a zigzag route. Mexico. Where do they go to? Panama. A couple other places, and they end up in, of all places, Paraguay. And I think this is pretty cool because this is pretty, this was a great idea by Michael Mann because, of course, Paraguay. My audience, we all know this and know about, the Paraguayan paperclip connections. But Paraguay is one of the hubs for the Rat Line, right? Now, this is way before the events in the novel take place because it's 1995. We're talking about Rat Line. We're talking about 1945. But it's where the Rat Line, the Odessa connection takes place. And anybody who's ever read anything about the escaped NOTSEES, right, sort of end up in Paraguay. In fact, Synchro, I was just rereading this with Mengele, who else, and Baumann, and some of their escape routes, especially Klaus Barbie, who was one of those guys who was then immediately funneled there with the help of the Vatican and CIA, and then was in the CIA's employ as a counter-terrorist. Anyway, so he goes to Paraguay, and Paraguay, especially Ciudad del Este, is a free city. It's an absolutely, it's like an uber capitalist zone, Wild West, where anything goes, and there's capitalism in the extreme, including the black market, which is not really a black market. It's an open market because it's an open city. And it basically, Shirless, or Val Killing It, goes down there, and he is then he's seen by another doctor who is in Nate's employ. John Voight has hooked him up down there because he did time with a guy in Folsom who was connected to a Taiwanese mob family that does highline government contract counterterrorism and counter-technical operations, and basically operates in stealing military hardware and software from the Czechs, from the Czech government, and then running it down there and then selling it to third world dictatorships, etc. And so that's what Chris finds himself in the midst of. He's seen by a doctor. Who gets him properly fixed up. He says the last guy was shit. Jeremy Piven didn't do a great job, and then he meets up with his contact down there. This guy Paolo, who is basically he's basically the enforcer hard man for a crime family, a Chinese or a Taiwanese family called the Lus in Paraguay. Now, they are down there because they have been forced first of all from China, then from Taiwan, now to South America where they see an opportunity. And they've been down there for a long time. And then comes a rival family. And the way that the city is set up is basically along ethnic lines, so that like, and this reminds me a lot of Malaysia. I lived in Malaysia for a summer, and in fact, this story takes us to Singapore. Singapore is at the tip of the Malay Peninsula in the Straits of Malacca. They also end up in Indonesia in the book, and that ties in with sort of Michael Mann's the Michael Mann sort of universe. If you've seen his film Black Hat, which is not a bad film, it's an underrated film with Hemsworth in it. That's about white hat hackers and tied in with MIC. That's a good film because it's pretty predictive in terms of what came after it. Of course, this had been happening for a while, but in terms of the a larger audience or the general population, anybody who paid attention to the film, it really plays into espionage and counter-espionage, especially with computers, right? And so Michael Mann's sort of territory, his universe, takes us to all these places, especially in his latter films. He just recently did that series Tokyo Vice, right, for HBO, set in Tokyo. So he likes, sort of an Eastern. There's an Eastern, or maybe we should just call it a globalist flair to his films, because it's reflective of reality, or maybe predictive. I don't know. That also occurs in his Miami Vice, in his film Miami Vice. Of course, Michael Mann became known for doing the Miami Vice television series in the 80s. We've actually, remember, we talked about Michael Mann recently in the High Concept Don Simpson biography, because Don Simpson named Michael Mann as one of the cabal, or one of the elites that the elites of the elites of Hollywood in their sort of secret club, right? Michael Mann, Katzenberg, David Geffen, all these people. But so, and I remember I found that unusual. But anyway, so Chris is set up with this crime family, and he basically learns that his job is, because he gets a job when he's down there. He's got plenty of money. His money has been spread into offshore accounts, and he wants to take care of his wife back home, but he can't contact her. His wife is Charlene Shaherless, and their son Dominic. And Charlene is in the film played by the super fine Ashley Judd, right? This is when Ashley Judd was like in the 90s, was just like fine, right? Before she went, Dana Delaney, totally insane. So anyway, so he can't contact her because, of course, there's a tap on their phones, and they're looking for them because he's not just a highline criminal. He's not just an armed robber. I mean, they killed a number of people in that takedown. So the police and the feds and all these people are looking for them, right? It's also transnational in terms of their crime. And he is the sole survivor. So they're looking for him. But time passes, and they can't get to him in South America. They don't even know he's there. They don't even know if he's alive. But, of course, Vincent Hanna knows he's alive because he's dialed in. This guy's more dialed in than anybody. Totally dialed in. He's always on the edge where I got to be, right? So he when he gets well, after he's sort of recovered from his, as he says in the film, his oxycodone haze and his fog of antibiotics, he learns that he also has to be on the edge because he's in a city where there is no crime. There's no common crime. And it reminds me a lot of his descriptions of Paraguay, especially Ciudad del Este. Reminds me a lot of Belfast because there's no petty crime. There are no muggings. There's no stick-ups. There's no street crime because everything is enforced and run by paramilitaries in Belfast or by the mob, by the various mob factions, crime syndicates in Paraguay. But he basically learns that he's in the employ of this family, and that he's been hired while he's down there to give him something to do, as to kind of rejuvenate their tactics, their weapons tactics, and to beef up their security. So what he does is he starts he's kind of like keeping his eyes open for the family, and the family owns this one like major block, like a gigantic block with factories and all this stuff in the city. And of course, the city borders on, it's right on Iguazu Falls, and Brazil is like right across the International Friendship Bridge, and then you can see Argentina. I mean, it's like in the corner of three separate countries, and so there's like a lot of people going in and out, and there are a lot of like shady characters. It really reads like at times it reads like a Wilbur Smith novel, or sort of a kind of a cheap adventure novel, but one, or a Tom Clancy novel, but one that works well. It's got a momentum, right? Just like those do. I mean, those are successful novels because they work well. They're interesting and they're fun, and they're not meant to be, they're not meant to be high canon literature. But there is some great writing in the book, and so what he sees is that there are a couple of fellas who keep like kind of. They're obviously casing the joint, right? They're obviously casing this place because they keep riding by on motorcycles. Not all the time, but enough so that a guy like Chris notices. Because Chris has been educated, of course, in the Criminal University of Folsom Prison with Neil Macaulay, Robert De Niro, as his mentor and sort of master teacher. And just like Neil was educated as such by John Voight's character, Nate. And so he tells his contact, Paolo, that he thinks that he needs a wider context for what's going on without asking too many questions, right? He don't want to ask too many questions about what's the nature of the Lou's business or what are they really into, but he basically tells them that he thinks it's being cased. And then Paolo says, "Why do you think so?" And he says, "Well, I noticed that they went inside the parking garage, and the parking garage, I looked at the schematics, and the parking garage almost certainly has access to the computer system." And that's one great thing that the movie does, is that it shows that each member of the crew has a specialty, right? Tom Sizemore is the electrical guy, right? When they're breaking into that one place where Pacino, looks at him, Pacino notices that Neil is he's the head of the crew. He's also the lookout outside. Trejo is the stick man. He's the driver. Val Kilmer is the heavy machinery guy. He's the one who, and the explosives guy. He's good with, shaped charges. And Tom Sizemore is good at breaking into the electronic systems and the computer systems and turning off alarms. So Chris knows that they are probably going to do this. What happens through a series of events is he ends up driving the main guy, and then he's asked to pick up an American from the airport, and he's just basically a driver at that point, and he's not told much else. And he picks up this American guy, and then he sort of shoots the shit with him, makes friends with him, and then he drops him off at the International Hotel. And this guy is supposed to be a contact for the family. But he goes back and he tells him, and then he meets up with the main guy, the head of the entire family, the Taiwanese guy. And he says, "This guy's not who he says he is." And he's like, "How do you know?" Well, he says, because for one, his watch is too shiny. The guy claims that he's both a Ranger and a Green Beret. The two you're not both. He makes a joke about, some joke about Fayetteville, and then the guy gets wrong that where he trained. He didn't train at Fort Bragg. He should have trained at Fort Benning. His watch is too shiny. You wouldn't be wearing that for tactical operations. It would glint in the moonlight. He handed him his bag when he got there. You would never do that. He's also got a passport that is too new and glossy, showing that he's not, that it's a fake passport it's made too well. And they're like, "Okay, it turns out you're right about that." And then what happens is he gives a girl, he has to go pick up the son of the crime boss, and then his sister, both of whom she's going to be the real head of the family. You figure that when you're reading that, but you don't know it for sure. But she is a post-grad student, and she is studying at the London School of Economics, of course. And she knows 5 languages. The son is a degenerate. You know right away that he's going to be a pervert. and we learn that later on that's verified. And anyway, he picks her up from the airport, and then they skirt around an attempted assassination. Now, it turns out the assassination was not meant for them; it was meant for somebody else. But they were made, and then the way that he that he diverted the car and did evasive maneuvers showed his counterpart in the other crime family that he was somebody that he knew. He knew how to handle himself. He then passes himself off as the American guy, because it turns out the American guy is taken, tortured, and killed. He passes himself off, and then he's the middleman and sells some high-grade military software, which is, we learn, spoofing. It's a GPS spoofing device. So what it does is it spoofs GPS coordinates for rocket systems and for military avionics and navigational equipment. And this is really in demand, especially at the time. Remember, this is 1995, so it's really in demand, especially by, they say, third world dictatorships, and especially like South African proto-fascist dictatorships that are, through mercenary armies that are popping up in Africa, etc. So then what happens is we sort of skip to 1988. We were in 1995. The book is going to go to 2000, but then we go back in time to 1988. And this is really interesting because we learn the sort of origins of Vincent Hanna and Neil McCauley, and that's Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. And so what we learned, and we knew that if you're a fan of if you know the movie, you know that would be true, because Michael Mann, of course, was inspired to do the story because when he was in Chicago, the story's based on a detective and a criminal, a highline criminal like De Niro, that this sort of cat and mouse game really did take place. Of course, it was like in the 60s, but Michael Mann knew the guy who plays the Vincent Hanna character, and he really did chase him, and they really did sit down for, lunch or whatever, and then he really did chase him and then kill him. And Dennis Farina also played a part in this, the actor Dennis Farina. Remember, Dennis Farina is in the movie, he's in Thief, and is he in Thief? I think he's in Thief, Michael Mann's 1983 film. He's also in Manhunter. Is Manhunter 83 or 85? Anyway, he's in both of those films. I actually saw Dennis Farina one time in New York when I was living there. He was filming. I always liked Dennis Farina. He died not too long ago, but I always liked Dennis Farina. He was a real life Chicago cop, obviously. Just look at him. And I saw him because I was leaving my house. I was on the way to. I was working at a bar. And they were filming Law and Order in my neighborhood, and I walked past Dennis Farina, and I said, "Hey, Dennis Farina, love you, man." And he said, "Hey, thanks, pal, really appreciate it. Thank you, guy." So, anyway, he sort of played a part in the genesis of this story, which then became L.A. Takedown, which then became Heat, which then became Heat 2, the novel, and all that's interesting and stuff. All that's like kind of lore for the film. But what's really interesting is the way that Vincent Hanna operates. So he's the head of robbery homicide in Chicago, and then later does that in LA. And what that means is that he's not a Fed, he's a cop, but he has jurisdiction citywide, especially in LA, where it's like, LA County absorbs all these little cities. And he can handpick the cases that he wants. And what he does is he picks up this case where a guy named what's his name, Wardell, I forget his name. He's the main sort of background antagonist in Heat 2. And this guy and his crew, what they're doing is they are casing really wealthy families in Chicago. And they have a contact who works as a valet, like in front of a restaurant where there's like a celebrity hairstylist next door. And then when they decide on a target, they take the key, they make a copy of the key, then they case the family, and then they bust into the family in disguise, into the family's house. And what they do in the start of the novel is they immediately go into the house. They take the man, the guy who's the dad. They ask him for the keys to his safe. They know he's got they're not, these guys aren't like a crew moving like Neil McCauley's crew. They're much lower down the food chain, but they get enough money and jewels and all this stuff that they need fences and all that. And but then the reason that Vincent Hanna takes the cases is because after they have robbed the family, the guy who leads the crew then decides to murder the dad, and then he will take the wife. He does terrible things to her, including ROYPE. And then in the first case, there's a teen daughter, and you think that she's going to be okay because the guy that Vincent Hanna ends up catching that leads to the bad guy takes her up to the room, kind of gets her out of the way, but then he says he's forced to violate her in order to be part of this crew because he's scared of the main guy. Now, of course, thankfully, Vincent Hanna later throws him off a roof. Takes this fucking scumbag and throws him off. But the point is that the main guy is sort of loosely mob affiliated, mob connected. We get an insight into the way that graft works in Chicago. I mean, anybody knows that, but it's sort of an insider's view in terms of the way that the Hanna has a counterpart in the police division who sort of works amongst these. They all grease the wheels, And Hanna is sort of outside of the system. In fact, he is. There's a great line where they talk about how he is above the system. He's beyond the system, and he's like sort of moving. He's not a lone wolf because he's got his own crew. And it's interesting, especially in the film, how Al Pacino's crew mirrors Robert De Niro's crew, right? Because he's got a crew of cops that mirror the bad guys. And of course, Al Pacino is the counterpart. He's the mirror counterpart to Robert De Niro. Val Kilmer has a counterpart in the Frosted Tips guy. Remember? The guy that Pacino says, "How you doing?" "Well, I'm kind of busted up." "Okay." And then he hangs up the phone. The guy lives. Danny Trejo has a mirror in Wes Studi, who is his cop. His name's Bosco in the film. And then, of course, the Stick Man, played by, what's his face? The guy in the commercials, and he's in Jarhead. What's that guy's name? Anyway, he has a mirror in Michael T. Williamson. And Michael T. Williamson, who is, remember, he's Bubblegum. Seats taken. Remember, Michael T. Williamson is the cop who, his name's Drucker. And he's the guy who, he's the guy in Heat who, he says, "Shut up," right? "Yeah, you're on a plane back to New Jersey, jag off." Remember that guy? So he plays a big part in he's the right-hand man of Vincent Hanna, and he follows him from Chicago to L.A. He's his right-hand man. So they've got their own sort of police crew. But again, they're working outside of the normal, grease the wheels graft system in Chicago, and they got to catch this guy because obviously he keeps doing the crimes. But as it turns out, the stories are all, of course, because it's, that's the way the crime novel works, but the stories are all interrelated because it turns out that Neil McCauley, Robert De Niro, comes to Chicago to do another Highline burglary. They rob this place. First, they have to get a clean car, and their contact is this guy named Grimes who works at an underground garage that's sort of mob affiliated, and he gets them their ride. And then Waddell, the rapist, murderer, bad guy, is sort of on the fringes of this and notices them. In fact, there's a scene where Grimes, the car guy, says to McCauley, like, "What do you guys need this truck for?" And McCauley's like, "What the fuck do you care what we need this truck for? Why are you asking questions?" Right? And so it's all about, like, not asking questions, not butting into anybody's business. And McCauley is tight. I mean, he knows that there can be no loose ends. He trusts his crew implicitly, but there can be the people that they need on the side, they have to be able to trust. And so this big robbery takes place, but then it turns out that Waddell is connected with them because then after the robbery, Nate hooks him up with with some more information from Kelso. Kelso is the guy played by Tom Noonan, the guy who in Heat is in the wheelchair that lives at the top of the hill with all the the electrical equipment, all the spying equipment, and he says, how do you get this information? Oh, it's out there. You just got to pluck it out of the air, man. It's all out there. And this guy's a hacker, right? And he hooks him up with some information about where these trucks are going, and the trucks that they keep seeing are loaded with Chicago, the Chicago end of the drug money, of the dope money that is going back to the Mexican cartels across from Yuma, Arizona, right into Mexico. And so Macaulay decides, because so the way they find that also is they break into a bank through the back, they break into a safety deposit vault from the back through like a parking garage, and they put a shape charge on it. They cut through the steel, and then they steal everything out of the safety deposit boxes. And amongst the things that they steal, they find gold bars, they find Krugerrands, they find silver. They leave the jewel, especially the set jewels, because they can't fence them. They take some of the cash, the big money cash. They don't take like small cash. And these guys are only interested in like 6-figure scores, right? 7 to 8-figure scores minimum. And so one of the things that they find is they find some hard drives and floppy disks. And Kelso told them that when they were in the robbery, make sure you look out for anything unusual. So Neil decides to throw it in the bag. He sends it to Kelso. Kelso analyzes it. It's all encrypted. He decrypts it, and he finds that it is the Mexican, it's the cartels' shipping routes and all of their data for how they get to the other side, right? How they get through the border. Now, Neil has a contact in Mexico who's this girl who is like a 7th-generation smuggler and knows the routes back and forth. And he's actually in love with her. She's got a daughter. And you know where that's going to go, right? So what happens is they decide to take down the score, which is this cartel warehouse where they house, I don't know, all their hundreds of millions from their take. And they get like 7 trucks. They get 7 trucks like once or twice a week full of cash. So his crew decides to go down to Mexico, and they take the cartel warehouse. But in the midst of doing that, Waddell has followed them because he tortured the guy who owned the parking garage. So they get down there, and then Waddell has found the truck that Macaulay got from Grimes. And then, of course, what does he do? He kidnaps Gabriella, or Elisa is her name, which is Macaulay's, his woman. Yeah, I got a woman. His woman, this is in 1988. And thankfully, Gabriella, the little girl, gets away. She'll later play a part in the novel. And Macaulay, he gets away, but the rest of his crew that he goes down there with is killed by Macaulay and by his crew. And so Macaulay is, that gives him impetus for the film when he says, a guy once told me, do not let yourself get attached to anything that you cannot walk out on 30 seconds flat when you feel the heat round the corner, right? That's sort of his impetus for that. That's why in the film, when he meets Edie, he walks away, right? Because he's already had this in Mexico. Of course, in Mexico, he has no choice because he has to get her. He loves her, and because he wants to care for the little girl. The little girl ends up growing up, so we see that in fast forward to 2000, at this point, Chris Shiherlis, who is Val Kilmer, is lovers with the girl that he protected for the Lou gang, and it's sexy. I mean, there's some sexy scenes, y'all. Because it's dangerous. It's a dangerous relationship. And he's not Taiwanese, so he's not sleeping his way to the top. He knows that. She knows that. But he is sort of running the operations, and their business has expanded. They put some malware in their system that they sold to the rival family who now wants payback. And his job takes him with her sort of all around the world. They're going to Singapore, they're going to Africa, they're going to Indonesia, and he ends up back in L.A. Of course, when he ends up back in L.A., somehow Hanna is in L.A. because Hanna has found a girl who has been tortured and killed and the other things, and she's in a shallow grave, and he realizes right away that it's Waddell, the guy that he was chasing that got away in Chicago and that got away from Macaulay. So Macaulay and Hanna have this, they have the same enemy. And then anyway, what happens? I know I'm giving like a long version of the plot here, but this is the book. What happens is Chris sees that Charlene is now like with another guy, not Hank Azaria, with another guy. So she's good. He's not gonna see her again, but like his son is being raised right. And then he decides he's going to go after Hanna. He's going to kill Hanna. He follows him, and then Hanna is on the trail of this girl who identified the guy, and the guy is Waddell, the guy that killed her mother. That's also the guy that Hanna's after anyway, because he had killed this woman in a shallow grave and all this stuff. He's a serial killer, right? And then she gets kidnapped by Waddell. She kicks him in the face, gets away in a car chase. He ends up getting chased by Chris, who's there to kill Hanna, but then he protects the little girl. Al Pacino shoots the bad guy. Chris gets the girl to safety. She lives, and then Chris takes off, and he lives. So it's happily ever after, right? Now, it's a complicated plot, but that's because it's a crime novel and because it's a saga. I mean, it's a true saga. And this is like one of the great sort of, multi-dimensional, multi-decade crime sagas. And the reader may feel that some of this is, coincidental, but Michael Mann does a great job in the narrative of sort of quelling those, of dispelling those sort of questions, because he even at one point says that Macaulay himself didn't believe in coincidences. He doesn't believe in happenstance. Everything is for a reason. That will tie into his worldview that I'll discuss in a minute. But he knows that they're like, just as there is a mirror image of the cops and the robbers, right? There's also a mirror image of the sort of reality that everybody's living in and the sort of underworld reality, right? Just like in his choice of making half of the narrative in South America, because it's a mirror of the North American crime that happens. Everything that happens in North America in the book is mirrored in South America in its sort of underworld origins. So in other words, the military technology that's going to the Northern Hemisphere originates in the Northern Hemisphere, goes to the Southern Hemisphere where it's, middlemanned out and sold through various crime syndicates, and then taken through a series of routes to the Northern Hemisphere. Just like Chris is a criminal in the Northern Hemisphere, goes to the Southern Hemisphere to escape, plies his trade, and then ends up in the Northern Hemisphere. If that makes sense. Yeah, it's a kind of a as above, so below. But one of the things about this is that there's, the metaphysical questions of the novel, right, where you start to think about what are these characters, what drives them, what do they believe in? And one of the questions that I had, one of the problems that I had essentially was that there's a part where when Neil Macaulay, Robert De Niro, is in love with his Mexican girl, they're talking about the meaning of life. They're essentially talking about the meaning of life. He's looking up at the stars, and she's questioning him about, how can we exist in our smallness compared to the largeness of the greater universe? And his answer is essentially that it's his is different from Hanna. Robert De Niro believes, in a sense, that he doesn't believe in any kind of meaning, but he's not just like a fatalist. He's just a nowist, meaning that his whole life is so tied up with the minute-to-minute details. Everything that these characters do is in the moment. Everything. I mean, they do make plans, and they plan for the future, and they do those things, but they essentially live in the eternal now. And his philosophy comes from. He quotes Camus in the book, and he says that he learned Camus from Nate when he was in prison. Now, I'm not saying what I'm saying here is that obviously this is ridiculous, and And one of the things that kind of bothered me was the fact that how can he believe that life is, it's not that it's a series of coincidences, but that there is no meaning. How can he believe this when at the same time he believes in love? He clearly believes in love, and he loves this girl. He's willing to go completely outside of his paradigm, right? Which is to leave everything in 30 seconds flat, which is what he does in the film. But in the book, why would he do that when he knows that he's leaving his paradigm to go and chase his love, who's been kidnapped, because he knows that there's something greater than himself, and he knows that there's something beyond just the eternal now for him, right? So in a way, he doesn't know what he wants. He's lost, and I think that sort of plays a role in his motivations and his driving force, especially in the film, because he's obviously chasing for something that he can hold on to. He wants something that's peaceful. That's why in the film, when he goes home, there's the great scene that's based on the painting. He goes home and his apartment is like sterilized. There's nothing there. When he finds out where Neil lives, overlooking the Pacific, he goes in and he immediately he says, "There's nothing here for us. I'm leaving," and he leaves. But the other cops are like, "Well, don't you want to take fingerprints?" And he's like, "There's no need for. We know who the guy is. There's no need for fingerprints, and we're not going to find anything of use here. There's one bottle of vodka in the fridge. That's it. There's no food." Remember, in the film, Chris, he gets home and Val Killen is asleep on the hardwood floor, and he's like, "Someday you got to get some furniture." And he's like, "Yeah, think about it," right? Because there's no furniture. There's nothing there. But at the same time, he's overlooking the Pacific and he's staring off into the blue distance like he's searching for meaning in in the oceans of time, right? He wants something bigger than himself. Where does he want to go in the film? Remember, his plans are to escape to Fiji. They mentioned that in the book. But that's because it's a far away place, and for him, it's not the afterlife. His afterlife is on Earth, right? And that's his loss. That's why he doesn't make it, because he doesn't realize that he realizes that he has to rely on his crew, but he doesn't realize that he has no meaning in his life. Hanna, on the other hand, is sort of the same character. In a sense, he's his mirror, but Hanna clearly believes in, even though Hanna is probably even more taken up with now, what's happening now, and he mentions that his police work is like 90%, remember in Point Break, you know how we make the big cases? By crunching data. Remember that? John C. McGinley, does he say data or data? By crunching data, that's what he says. There's one thing that I learned in all these years. Oh, yeah? Well, why don't you astonish me, shitface? He punches him. Respect for my elders. Plain and simple. Hanna is taken up with now, right? It's all about crunching data, and finding the information from ballistics and from the autopsy reports and from, the crime lab and from, fingerprints and all this stuff. But he knows that is not what catches as he calls them, the highline criminals. He only catches criminals. He catches criminals by his edge, right? By his gut feeling. And his gut feeling is almost this psychic drive to be in the mindset of criminals. He knows that there are two kinds of cops. There's one who, it's kind of like acting in a way. It's like classical acting versus method acting, right? There's the story of, this is a weird analogy, but there's the story of Dustin Hoffman, right, on the set of that movie Marathon Man, that great Marathon Man film. Great 70s film about Laurence Olivier as, of course, an escaped two letters of the alphabet, Notsee, doctor, who had been torturing people in the certain camps because he's a dentist, right? And he catches Dustin Hoffman, and Dustin Hoffman, for his part, he's the marathoner, and so for the part where he's tortured, is it safe? Is it safe? That part. he had stayed up for 3 days and he had been running constantly and he looked disheveled, and he came in and he looked the part. But one of the crew commented on Dustin Hoffman's, his physical health, and he told him what he had done, and Laurence Olivier had the great comeback and said, try acting, dear boy. In other words, you can play the role and pretend, but have a dispassionate objectivity, and you don't have to internalize all of the things that you're going through in order to play the part. And just like that, there's a part in the book where they mention that the characters, there's a cop who, again, I think his name's Baumann. He's the counterpart of Vincent Hanna, but in the Chicago police, who lives amongst these criminals. He's got all these contacts. He plays the game. He plays it really well, but he doesn't internalize it. But he doesn't have the success that Al Pacino does in the same sense, because Al Pacino says that his MO is to live the life, to understand, to get in the mind of the criminal. This is what we always get. This is like the trope of the troubled detective. I mean, this is like Matthew McConaughey in True Detective. Remember the scene in True Detective where Woody Harrelson goes to McConaughey's apartment and he looks, and there's like all the crime stuff on the wall, all the the strings and the pictures and the connecting the dots, but there's no bed. There's no fucking bed in the place because he has no time for that. That's something human that he doesn't have time for because he's living in this total this outer zone. The outer zone is like the free trade zone that the criminals live in Paraguay. And that is the same zone in which Hanna lives. There's a great scene also where in the film, remember, it's after Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman plays the daughter of his third wife, and she tries to commit the S word in the bathtub, and he saves her. You remember that? Natalie Portman, great role, and she's my age, so she's about 14 or 15 in the movie. And it's also interesting in the film, by the way, that she's got this son of a bitch dad who Al Pacino is like, where's the dad? And he's never there, and he never is in the film. So that reinforces the fact that he's this character we never see, just like she never sees him. And he's sitting in the hospital after he saved her. We're going to need a vascular surgeon and a trauma surgeon. You're going to need to intubate her, remember? That's where I learned the word vascular was in that movie. And he saves her, and he's sitting there with his wife, Justine, and he says, listen, she says, do you think it can ever work? And he says, I don't know. It's like you said, all I am is what I'm going after, right? So in other words, she makes a point of telling him that he's no better than the criminals he chases, but it's different than that. It's that he lives in the same outer zone as they do. He like when he goes to make the appointment with Albert, right? Albert, what's wrong with you? You get me here, right? You met a guy who was an ex-con. Well, whoop-de-fucking-do. What do you want for that, a Junior G-Man badge? I'm telling you, this Slick is no joke Slick. Say what? Say what? Say what? Remember that scene? He goes to these places at like 3 a.m. to meet these guys, and it's obviously criminals and cops. So he lives in this zone, right? And he's also, but we know that he has faith. He's wearing a cross. He wears a cross necklace, and he wears wears crosses on a bracelet that he's wearing. And we also get the and he has to have some sort of faith in order to understand that there's a larger picture. In order to he has to have faith in order to live, doesn't he? I mean, what do you guys think? Doesn't he have to in order to abide, to not sink into the malaise and the ennui that the characters must sink into without becoming one of them, right? We also know that he's constantly on edge because he is a sometime cokehead. He's on dexedrine. He takes Adderall in 2000. He's on amphetamines. We learned that he got this habit from when he was in the military. And that's interesting. That's one of the revelatory elements in the book, because another thing that mirrors Al Pacino and De Niro is that we know these guys have to have military backgrounds in order to accomplish the things that they do and to move like they do. Now, we learned that Val Kilmer does not have a military background, even though he is an advisor to the paramilitary tactics in Paraguay and the crime syndicate. But he never was in the military because he was picked up when he was young and then put in Folsom, and that's where he met Neil. So he has kind of a private paramilitary background where he learned all of his tactics. But Neil and Hanna are older men, and we learned that Robert De Niro's character was picked up for petty theft when he was young, and he had basically, it was that thing of two choices. He could either go to jail or he could sign up for the Marine Corps. So he ends up, we learned that Robert De Niro ended up as a LRRP. This is really interesting. I kind of figured this would be the case. They never say this in the movie, but we know that Al Pacino is a Marine because Nate, John Voight, tells Robert De Niro that in the background when he's telling him about Hanna and how he's like a wolf. He's always on the job. And he was a Marine. He's a graduate student. He went to, where did he go to school? He went to like DePaul University or something. But we learned that Al Pacino was a Marine he was at Khe Sanh. He was at the Battle of Khe Sanh, and that's where we learned his habits, his temperament, the way that he moves, because he survived Khe Sanh and the Tet Offensive, and he went through a bunch of his friends, dying and the battle. And then we learned that Robert De Niro was a LRRP, a long-range reconnaissance patrol. Now, this is interesting because, again, I kind of figured this would be the case. I don't know why, but I guess just from his characteristics in the film, I figured he would either be a LRRP or he would definitely be a nom. And remember that Mahershala Ali's character was a LRRP in True Detective Season 3. LRRPs were also tied in with Phoenix Program. LRRPs, Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol, were the guys who were troubled individuals brought over to Vietnam, trained, and then were sent off, sometimes lone wolf style, into Cambodia, like in Apocalypse Now. And they were told, you got 30 days, find out the movements of the enemy, come back with a certain number of ears, etc. And we learned that that's Robert De Niro's character. Now, Robert De Niro he is psychopathic, but he's not psychotic, in the sense that he also has his own code. He's not a loose. Robert De Niro he's the antithesis of the loose cannon. The bad guy in the book is the loose cannon. He is a total psychopath and a psychotic, and that's why he does what he does. But Robert De Niro only does things that accomplish his goals and his mission. At one point, Chris talks about how he was told by Neil, when they're doing their robberies and their burglaries, that they do them in secret. Everything's controlled. And then when it comes to the day, if it's out in the open, depending on the circumstances, you're supposed to minimize casualties and minimize conflict, except for when a person gets in your way to accomplishing your goals, what he essentially says. And yeah, so just a couple of things here. The writing I thought was really good. And I'm always wary when somebody has a ghost. Obviously, you're wary when somebody has a ghostwriter or co-writer. One of the things that bothered me in the book was that it's this sort of, I don't know how to characterize it other than to say it's like the extreme boomer expressions that seep into the book. And I have to think that this is the co-writer who did this, because she's trying to mirror the way that Hanna talks in the film, and this is one of the differences that this is what separates, just like we separate song lyrics from lyric poems, right? The lyric poem has to work on the page and in the voice, has to work audibly. Well, the screenplay is meant for production. It's meant for performance. And so the boomer expressions don't seem as such when they come from Al Pacino in the movie, because they are Hanna's character, right? Remember when he says things like, what do you think I am, Donald Duck? Right? I mean, that's like, you don't really think of that. That's his character. He just says outlandish and sort of wild things that are in line with his character. They're not like cringy. But in the book, sometimes it doesn't work because there are too many of them. But the thing that does work, and it also is very like crime novels do this a lot, which is that there are sentence fragments interspersed throughout the crime, especially the noir film or the noir novel, because we have this sort of idea that it's not that the character's voice or his inner voice is fragmented, but it's that he's throwing in references to make a scene fit or to make the scene like come together or fit in the mind of the reader or the viewer. And it doesn't really work in this novel because it's like it's too much focused on it's too much like it's centered on the locus of the time and place, but we're reading this in 2022 and it's not timeless, if that makes sense. Now, you could counter that by saying, yeah, but if it's centered on a time and place, then this is absolutely necessary for the time and place. This is like 1988 through 2000, so this is what characters will be talking about, and I get that. But it takes away from the electricity of the novel. I mean, I called this Cobalt Blue Crime because just like in Don DeLeo, there's this weird undercurrent, and by undercurrent I mean like an electrical current that runs in the veins of these characters. It's like he's in this one part he mentions mercury running through the veins of Hanna, and it's to say that there's like a liquid metal, there's an electrified magnetic quality to their lives where they're completely dialed into their circumstances and to the narrative of whatever the criminal case that they're on runs on. And so that is amazing. If the language was more economical, it would be really it wouldn't be the same book, and certainly the film, I think the film is perfect. I mean, the film like works on so many levels, especially with the fact that there's this chromatic like sort of I don't know what you would call it. It's like cobalt. It's like a blue that runs through the film. Now that's kind of in your face. I mean, every scene in the film, if you noticed, has blue in it, and that's not because it's the thin blue line. I mean, it is a cops and robbers story, but it's because their life is kind of an oceanic blue. There's both an abyss, there's a Pacific abyss that is the unknown in terms of who they are and what they're doing, especially to the general public, but it's also like an electrical current running, through your house that you don't see. It's always there and it's always running, but you don't see it. Just like these criminals and the cops who chase them are running through, if that makes sense. So there's a scene where, let's see, we do get some of the language in the book is amazing because I'm so awkward with this microphone trying to not knock into it and break your eardrums. He says, let's see. Smooth was fast. Yeah. Neil McCauley became aware that somebody was on him. When it happened, his reaction was calm and smooth because smooth was fast. Fast wasn't fast. Shaherlis was inside a precious metal depository, cutting a hole in a metal vault door with a hollow core drill at 3 a.m. Cerrito was up a telephone pole monitoring his alarm system bypasses. Trejo, on lookout, was circling the block. I mean, even that paragraph seems kind of commonplace in the book, but it's not. The writing there is really clever because, for one, the fact that, it's poetic in the fact that Neil McCauley is aware that somebody is on him, but he doesn't know who or how. It's just an electrical surge in his systems, right? And when he says that his reaction was calm and smooth because smooth was fast, fast wasn't fast, that makes sense. Doesn't that make sense? He does things with urgency, but he doesn't do things with a fast sloppiness. The fact that Shahurlis is inside a precious metal depository with a cutting a hole into a metal vault door with a hollow core drill at 3 a.m, a diamond tip drill. That fits perfectly. The way that the instruments and their methods of doing things mirrors. It's like a prismatic mirror of the various ways that they have to zig and zag through life, and the instruments that they use are extensions of their body and soul. Let's see. That was on page 2 of the book. A low voltage. It says, this is a great passage. This is probably my favorite passage of the book. This is on page 56, chapter 13. It says, Hanna is parked at the curb. Now he gets out and walks down the sidewalk under the lush canopy. He passes on his right a tungsten yellow bay window in a granite townhouse. A couple watches the activity down the street. High ceilings, ornate cornices, large table lamp, a lush vibe of the good life, he thinks, the rustle of leaves, dead quiet. From the house at the end of the street, there's a distant blue-white flash of a camera. It's silent, too. Hanna's face changes. A low voltage pulses under his skin, like his heart knows the imminence of a scene racing at him as he takes the granite stairs 2 at a time. From the side of the house around the corner, an ambulance pulls away, lights spinning. White and blue units crowd the side street. Do you get the ambiance of the language? Right? Do you get the electrical, the low voltage of his MO? On page 64 and 65, I was interested to see that living theater was mentioned. We covered living theater in, I forget what stream it was that we covered that. And it was also mentioned in a JD stream. Shouts out to Jay at Jay's Analysis. The living theater is part of the post-World War II avant-garde New York sort of Antonin Artaud, who was a French poet and playwright who wrote Theater of Blood and Theater of Cruelty. And basically this is like the avant-garde notion of 20th century theater where it's not realism, it's a kind of a hyper-surrealism where there is no difference between the audience and the performers. So the performers are performing. It's not that they're breaking the fourth wall. It's that there is no fourth wall. It's that the audience and the performance are one. And that is exactly in line with the way that the criminals and the cops exist, because they operate in broad daylight and at night, and they are hidden in plain sight. And it's just like the scene where in the film, remember that they decide to rob the bank in broad. Now they have to rob the bank in broad daylight to get the cash from the vault in that instance, because they can't break into the vault and because that's when the delivery happens. Earlier in the film, they'll break into things at night, when they have no chance of being discovered. They do that in the book as well. Their major score, they take down that's what I do. Listen, I do what I do best. I take down scores. You do what you do best. Trying to stop guys like me. What are you, a monk? I got a woman. There's a flip side to that coin. What if you do got me boxed in? Because I will not hesitate, not for a second. Listen, if it's between you and some guy whose wife you're going to turn into a widow, then brother, you are going down. Yeah, and that's exactly what happens in the film, right? They have to rob it in broad daylight. But remember that what's interesting is that Macaulay, this is one of the brilliant things about the film, is that Al Pacino wears the kind of dark Armani suits that allow him to slipstream into the darkness and the currents of the life that he has to chase in order to catch the bad guys, right? He's all around the city, but he mostly operates at night. Macaulay, on the other hand, this is kind of a flip, right? Northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. This is kind of a flip. So Macaulay, the bad guy, operates a lot in the film in broad daylight. But notice that his costume is he's always wearing sort of the gray suit, right? It's like a gray Armani suit. It's not flashy. It's mute. It's classy. It's kind of classy enough that it allows him to look like he belongs, but it's not so much that he stands out because he is the gray man, right? He is, and maybe this is something that he learned as a LRRP, one of the tactics that he learned. Of course, he would be in uniform doing that, but and certainly this would be natural for a highline criminal, but he's put together enough that he fits in. But he's the gray man where he doesn't stand out. And so when they rob the bank, they're all in gray. They walk right in with ARs, under their suits. They're standing in line at the bank. They decide to put their balaclavas on. And it's not until the moment that he strikes the guard, that Val Kilmer strikes the guard, that anybody notices anything. They're right there. And this sort of typifies a kind of a living, I know it's kind of a stretch. It's kind of an analogous stretch, but to me, it typifies their sort of living theater MO. Not to say that they are theatrical, but certainly their performance in the bank is theatrical. I mean, Robert De Niro even gets up on a stage, so to speak. Remember, he in the final robbery in the bank, he stands up on the countertops and he says, "Think of your families." Right? Anybody has a heart condition, lean against the wall. Remember, and he's walking across the stage. He's jumping on the countertop in front of the cash registers or in front of the bank tellers, like he's treading the footlights, right? And he's standing up in a performance where everyone can see him, and yet he's still masked. On page 92 and 93, we learned that Hanna was part of MAC-V. Remember we talked about MAC-V SOG recently. I forget what stream did we talk about that in, but we've talked about it a bunch, especially with regards to the Phoenix program. He was part of MAC-V SOG, and let's see, he learned his tactics. And that he started on amphetamines in Quezon. It says, let's see. I remember the street name, Win Trong Do, a block down from Le Loi, which ran along the Perfume River. Le Loi was a boulevard in Paris. In the roadway, a Vietnamese woman had been run over by 4 retreating Arvan M41 Bulldog tanks. She was flattened. Her corpse was two-dimensional, like a cardboard standing outside a movie theater. I didn't want to look at her, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. I still see her. Who was she? How'd she get there alone? Somewhere else in the ruins was someone waiting for her to return? Anomalies. Those are what stick in memory, he thinks. Packs of civilians running toward them, even though both sides shouted for them to go back as they raced directly into the crossfire. An affluent villa they bivouacked in once held a family who preferred a dignified suicide. They were all seated around their dining room tables. Sometimes the rubble was hallucinogenic, green and blue ceramic fragments in the rain from the palaces and temples. They fought relentlessly. Thanks to top-grade U.S. government dextroamphetamine, Hanna and the others downed it like M&Ms. It turned his world bright and aggressive and electric and imbued him with the conviction he was invulnerable until he crashed. In the down, some men looked around for what they could kill. That's pure. That's almost pure Phoenix program, but that's also just typifies Quezon, right? And Jethro says probably Apocalypse Now, BLA. Yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting that Al Pacino was considered and asked to be the role of Willard in Apocalypse Now. Studio said no, they didn't want somebody like Al Pacino, that he was too, a word I can't use here, but they wanted more of a straight man, like a straight-looking man, like an all-American, I guess, like Martin Sheen ended up being, even though they had chosen Harvey Keitel before that, right? But Harvey Keitel was a real Marine. 118 and 119. This is a great passage. Hanna sees a shimmer around Bowman's face, an aura, a defocused zone amid the visual noise of the active crime scene. See, the language there is tight. It's electric. It's cobalt, right? It's like, it's weird. This sounds way too poetic, but it's like a direct energy weapon in language. This is like Don DeLeo's ionized atmosphere, right? Notice the Z sounds in the language, right, which is onomatopoetic, like humming the electricity in his verbiage and the way that he thinks. A defocused zone amid the visual noise of the active crime scene. Hanna feels like cool mercury is moving through his veins. His eyes are cold. It's like he momentarily zones into another time and place and out beyond fatigue, fueled up on dexies in the rubble with everyone else as they fire, grenade, wound, kill, get wounded, get killed, zombies in the cold rain. Right? That's a brilliant passage. We learned that on pages 128 and 129 that Charlene, by the way that Chris Val Kilmer met Charlene, Ashley Judd, was after their big score in 1988, he went to Vegas. And remember, he's a gambling junkie, right? Because I got to tell him that he's got a gambling junkie. Remember, he's a gambling junkie. He goes to Vegas and he walks over to the sports book and he sees Charlene. Charlene, of course, is a prostitute, a sex worker. And she sees him, and of course it's free of charge because he's sexy, she says. And they immediately start talking. Her HO name is Cinnamon, and his name, I forget what he says his name is, but they go up to his room in the Mirage or whatever. Of course it's a mirage, right? Because their life is a mirage. Of course it's at the Mirage. Their life is a mirage. Their future is a mirage together. It's an illusion. They won't have one together. But they go up, just like their appearance is also a mirage in a sense. So they go up to the room, and it says they go up, they shoot smack, they make love until dawn, and then she goes off to meet her pimp. And of course, later, you know what's going to happen to the pimp, right? He's going to get pimp slapped by Chris. Val Killing It is going to kill this dude. Which he does. He gives her $10,000 later after another score and gets her to pay off her pimp, and then he chases her. He ends up busting this dude. He busts him right in the head outside. On pages 172 and 173, we learned that Macaulay was a LRRP. It says 5 months later he found himself in the strangling jungle greenery of Cu Chi, crawling into Viet Cong caves with a short-barreled semi-auto 12-gauge in the 25th Infantry Division. He's a tunnel rat right there. During the early weeks of the Tet Offensive, he accompanied a few long-range reconnaissance patrols to Army Rangers and engaging units of regular PAVN. The Rangers tried and failed to recruit him. He had other plans later. The battles he and Chris fought were with police in the combat zones of urban America. That's interesting because our background of Neil right there informs our later foreground of Chris when he identifies the guy, the Mirage man, the fake guy, who is working probably for Treasury as an undercover agent. He's a newbie. He's a Greenwood, right? And he's identified by Chris. He's out of his element, Donnie. And when he misidentifies Rangers and Green Berets as being the same thing, of course, Chris would only know this through secondhand experience through Neil, because he was educated by Neil at Folsom, right? He has no military experience himself. On pages 240 and 241, we get Camus. It says, let's see. This is a great passage, chapter 48. Neil walks behind Elisa in the quiet night. They're in Mexico at this point. This is the part of the prequel leading up to the 1995 heist. She's climbing, her hips swaying, hair glossy in the moonlight. The dunes have dissipated in the day's heat. Traffic drones on I-8, distant. Mountains and canyons slice the view. The sand slides beneath Neil's feet. Elisa stops at the crest of you see where this is going? Elisa stops at the crest of the dune. Hands on her hips, her shoulders are thrown back, her chin high, she's barely out of breath. Neil catches up. See what I mean, she says. She stops at her side. Her eyes absorb the night. The algodones dunes flow from horizon to horizon, a sea beneath the stars, just like the sea that Neil was staring at over the Pacific from his sanitized apartment, right? The Mexican border is 2 miles south. He can't see it. Elisa can. She points. Dark scar along the west. There, it's rock. Arroyo Seco. Dry Creek cuts through to La Linea. Who patrols, Neil says. How frequently? INS, Border Patrol, Federales. She shrugs. Once a year. We plan to drive. Of course, but you want me to show you these routes? I do. He slides his arm around her. That arroyo, she says, a dirt road leads down a canyon. Too steep for most drivers. Cops ignore it. Contrabandistas hike in. Small loads. Dope. People. A breeze scuttles around their feet. The sand shears. A scrim. Scintillating in the moonlight. That's almost Cormac McCarthy-esque right there with the arroyo and the scrim. That would be Plan Z, Neil says. Of course, it's the Z. That's right. It's the electric Z. Back up to all backups. Elisa turns. But now you know it's there and why it's Plan Zeta. She gestures, arms sweeping in a barely visible dark track. It skirts the dunes and disappears into a ravine. There, Neil puts the binoculars to his eyes. Under the moon, he can see the snaking road rising through the rocks. That's where contrabandistas get ambushed, Lisa says. When there, she snaps her fingers, searching for the word. Her English is flawless, but she wants the right emotional inflection. She switches in Spanish, slipshod, careless. They think they're in the clear because they're across the border, but pow. Neil wonders if this is romantic tale-telling of a smuggler tradecraft or a warning. We'll be coming in the daytime, unlike most other smugglers out here. And you're careful. You have eyes in the back of your head on a swivel. She looks at the horizon, then at him. She trusts him. He knows. Trusts his skill, his focus, his purpose. Like he trusts her knowledge of this country. She tucks her hands in her jean pockets. The 3 official crossings, you should use them all. The 2 in Mexicali, straight into Calexico. And the Winter Haven crossing for Yuma. Elisa knows 100 secretive smugglers pass into Mexico and by different routes, back across the border. She knows every girl who takes bribes at checkpoints. She isn't in the crew, but she is an integral part of the team that will get the crew safely back across the score. What? She says, admiring you. He turns back to the dunes. He scuffs the sand, erasing one of his footprints. She switches back to English. You will not cross the dunes. No, he exhales, just reminding myself how quickly things get erased. It all comes, it goes. You philosophize. We're all footprints on a beach. The tide comes through, and you were never there. A guy named Albert Camus wrote that. She tilts her head. What kind of name is that? French, Neil says. Elisa looks at him, her eyes shining in the dark. I'm here now. Exactly, that's the point. We're here now. No big reason we exist, no purpose, no heaven or hell waiting on how we pray. The only real question is, why keep on living? Is life worth it? Why not just kill yourself? The only judgment is how we use the now. Good question. That second to last question, that penultimate question, good question if that's his worldview, right? Well, his attempt at an answer, I don't want to put an end to it. If this is what we are, if this is what we have, better live it. Okay. But you see, he knows he's lying to himself, right? He knows that even his view of the dunes is a lie, right? Remember the mirage we just talked about? Oceans of sand, oceans. Everything that he thinks is an illusion to himself. He's fooling himself, and that's why he does the things that he does, or at least he's miserable. He thinks that he's this beast in the jungle, right? And that there's no purpose. But he knows, we know that he knows that there is one. He's just too afraid to confront it because he is too focused on the here and now because he thinks that is what will protect him. And in the end, he's wrong, right? He cannot rely on himself. He fails in the moment of truth, remember, at the end of the film. And it's interesting that it's a shadow that fails him, right? It's Vincent paying attention to the shadows in the light and how there is a greater context than just the guy pointing at him. He has to use clues, right? It's not just his instinct. He has to use his instinct, his muscle memory, but also his focus on the fact that he's after something bigger, right? That there's something bigger than himself. It says, yeah, we all have this moment. We live it conscious of what it means. Nothing, but completely live it. That's what it is. Page 242. Where you read this, she asks. Folsom. What's my life? Why do the time? What am I doing? What's any of this mean? Hit the library and said, where's the philosophy about why we're here, about time, what my life means? Dude with the book cart turned me on to Camus. Well, it's okay that dude turned him on to Camus and that he was reading. That's great. If only he turned him on to a bigger book, Also, right, where Camus is just a blip. That's heavy, she says. That's why I love you, crazy man. He holds her a moment, nerve ends, awake from the night, the recon, and especially from her, that scent, gardenias, the confidence and joy in her eyes. On page 262 and 263, we learned that they are smuggling cocaine and heroin across the border and that they are going to take down that score. They're not going to go after the drugs. They're simply going to go after the cash because they know that the cash is untraceable, right? We also learned that Chris Shaherlis, Val Kilmer, was a pharmaceutical morphine addict. That's why he got in trouble when he was a teenager, and that he constantly goes back to that. That's not in the film, but that certainly plays a part in his characterization and his motivations. On pages 304 and 305, I wrote, friends equals saints to him, visions, religious allegory. He has no beliefs, only fatalistic nowness. Love, he would have no room for love in his worldview, right? Because there's a part where she's dying and she wants him to pray for him. She's praying and she wants him to pray, and he has no prayers. He only prays he prays, but he inserts his friends' names instead of saints' names in his prayers when she's dying, which I found interesting and in line with his own worldview. Of course, it being false, and then she dies. On pages 324 and 325, there was something really interesting, and that is that it says, let's see. Let me find this one part. It says, the Lus, that's the LIUS, that's the name of the crime syndicate, the Taiwanese crime syndicate. Remember, it's also interesting that they are Taiwanese. I mean, the Taiwanese are obviously inherently Kuomintang, Chiang Kai-shek's defeated army moving on to Taiwan, calling themselves, what is Taiwan? The Republic of China. And then they, of course, then move on to Paraguay. But it says, the Lus do deals, access supplies, finished goods, hardware and components, available supply chains, make bank transactions through global electronic funds transfers. They have access to government databases in Russia and Israel for intel on customers and any law enforcement that may impede them. They mostly avoid jurisdictions like the United States and thereby fly above legal strictures. They don't break laws, they soar above them and above national judicial systems. Operating from this open city, this free trade zone, they operate outside the hostile police forces, judges, grand juries, parasitic lawyers, and deal makers within which Chris's criminal career had been submerged. However, there is no safe harbor. It's a state of nature, a lethal jungle. You make your fate. It is in your hands. Hunter and hunted roam unconstrained. Your intelligence, discipline, and willingness to engage in all forms of violence are the functions that determine whether you survive. If that's not a description of the DEPSTATE and the specter octopus organism of the elite and the model or the paradigm of part of the pyramid, then I don't know what is, right? Because I thought that was pretty revelatory. That was a great paragraph because it talks about how the people that are Chris has only seen one side of the coin. He's about to see the flip side to that coin, right? He has been engaged in the day-to-day urban warfare life of the highline armed robber. Now that's different than the you don't see me doing liquor store holdups, right? Then Waddell and these other guys are engaged in, or the petty common criminal. But it's still like steps down and on a totally different spectrum than the world he is engaged in the book. So he makes it up levels of the pyramid, and he sees that the real crime is the crime that passes off as legal because the people who run it use crime as part of their syndicate system, and that it's not that they break laws, is that I was above their petty lying morality. Remember Kurt says in Apocalypse Now, they are completely above, they believe those things are moot. They are completely above those. They soar above supranational boundaries, right? They don't go to the United States because they know that there is a zone which they cannot cross, but they still make it there, and their money still flows through it. But they use the globe as their sort of organism, right? They don't go through things; they are above things. I mean, we've talked about this endlessly with regard to, these sort of the grand chessboard and Afghanistan and conflicts and resources and opium trade and black budgets and all these things. And I thought this was a pretty revelatory passage for them to use because it just shows that Chris has made his way into part of this pyramid paradigm. On pages 362 and 363, Kelso hacks part of the crime syndicate's dark web data and finds that they are engaged in, they're engaged in dope smuggling, heroin traffic, and he says a lot of this makes its way to, he says, there's market segmentation, entry level, that's shoulder-launched missiles, cheap, can take out a helicopter or a piñata at your kid's birthday party. See what I mean by the boomer expressions. Mid-level, surface-to-air SAMs, right? Surface-to-air and air-to-air missiles. You're talking about state actors, countries with air forces. The top, inertial navigational systems. Those ride in ballistic missiles, rockets, theater, intercontinental. He leans back. Who wants this stuff? Who doesn't? Religious freaks in the mountains, third world right-wing paramilitaries and U.S. government they won't fund anymore. Shining path, rogue states. Everybody wants to defend themselves from enemies real and perceived and to project power. All different tentacles of the same system. On page 372 and 373, we learned that he was a pharmaceutical morphine addict. I love that he had to give credit to Jim in the credits on the copyright page because he quotes L.A. Woman when he goes back to L.A., right? Hills are filled with fire. If they say I never loved you, you know you're a liar. Motel Money, Murder Madness, right? Because that view of L.A. certainly permeates the aura the book gives off, right? And it's not only L.A., but it's the Ciudad del Este. So some things about the film. Before I do that, let me check Super Chats. I think something came in here. Let's see here. Sweet. Oh, look at that. Thank you. Thank you. Allie sent $10 for, we've got the documents, folks. I'm not bragging. Look, I'm not bragging here, folks, but I've seen the movie Heat probably 10 bazillion times. I've seen the movie Heat 322,000 times. I first saw it when I was 15. Right? I've probably seen it so many times. I remember watching it with my homeboy Logan over in Bowling's basement in 2000. I remember watching it in 98. I quoted it with my friend Jeff, who's now an actor in the Royal Shakespeare Company when we were in England all the time. He did the best Al impression. I'm not bragging, folks. But Allie sent me $10, all right? So thank you so much, Allie. Thank you for sending me that $10. Really appreciate you. Thank you to our homegirl, Kristen, at Slowboy Whiteboard, who sent me that $5. Really appreciate you, Kristen. Yes, thank you, y'all. Listen, and, $5, $10, $1, $100, your money, your donations, your kind and generous donations mean so much to me. They really keep us going here. And I know how hard y'all work. I know how hard listeners and viewers and friends and audience and Chad nerds and Cotellians, right? I know how hard y'all work. Shit. Right? That's why you're tuned in, dialed in, high IQ. I appreciate you all. And so the fact that you take a little time to send me some support really means a lot to me. So thank you. Because, man, it is hard to make a damn buck out here. We all, shit. Excuse my language, but we know that. I know that. You know that. We all know that. Shit. I'm trying to get to Mississippi to see my family at the end of the week. But I got to consider the damn gas prices, right? And all the stuff that happened today with the NORD and all that stuff. Man, gas going through. I mean, look, I know it goes up and down. We know all that. But for the for the working man, for the working lady out there, for the everybody out there. I don't see how. I mean, you spend a buck is a buck, right? You work you work all damn day to make a buck, and then you get home, and then you get a $200 electric bill, and then it's all gone. And then you owe $100. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I know I'm rambling, but thank you. I really do appreciate it so much. Some of the things in Heat that I especially appreciate in the film are that we've gone into some of the, some of the metaphysical elements and of course the characterization, and the mirror elements in the film. But one thing that, and this has been talked about before, of course, this movie's been parsed out and analyzed to the extreme. But I would say one of the things that I really appreciate about the film is the first time I realized that because you wonder who you're supposed to go for, right? Who are you supposed to root for? Now, that's why it's a clever film, because in all of these films, like in cops and robbers movies, especially preceding this, it's, you're supposed to go for Law and Order and all that shit, right? Well, you're supposed to go for the cops, right? Of course, the bad guys in these films are always cooler. But in this, what's interesting is that not only are the bad guys and the good guys like kind of the same in the sense that there's not one that's cooler than the other. Who are you supposed to go for, Al Pacino or De Niro? Well, once I realized that you are clearly meant to sympathize with Al Pacino's character, and the book really fleshes that out. I mean, Hanna is a virtuous character in the sense that he is going after this bad guy who's doing these terrible things to women and to children, and he wants to destroy the bad guys. So you obviously are on his side. But at the same time, Macaulay is also of the same vein. Yes, he's committing these robberies, and but it's like in the film, it's hard not to sympathize with De Niro when he does the big score at the end, because he tells him, "No, your money's insured by the federal government. You won't lose a dime," he says. Now, of course, they have to go through the trauma of being assaulted and all this stuff, and Tom Sizemore loses all credibility in the film when he decides to use the KID as a human shield, and that's why Pacino puts a bullet in his brain, right? We lose all sympathy for the character in that very moment, and that's purposeful. But when I realized that we, meaning the audience, are supposed to at least subconsciously be rooting for De Niro, and it's through the film craft, it's through the clever use of little tricks and cinematography. For instance, I think everybody probably knows this, but there's a mirror scene. There's a scene that's mirrored in the film where at one point De Niro walks into it's in that scene we talked about where he's overlooking the Pacific at night. It's all blue, right? But when he walks in, you notice that he puts his keys on the table and he puts his gun on the table, and his gun is facing away from us, meaning that it's from our perspective, we are supposed to think that this is us because we put the gun down with the barrel facing away. The scene later occurs with Pacino walking into his house, into his dead tech postmodernistic bullshit house, and he puts the keys down and he puts the gun facing us. So we are supposed to think as an audience that Hanna is adversarial, right? He is not our friend. He is facing us down the barrel of the gun. The same occurs when at the climax of the film, Pacino shoots us, right? Because when the shadow moves, the perspective is from Macaulay. It's from Macaulay's perspective. We don't get things from, we never get a shot in that last scene of the gun pointing at us from Pacino's perspective. We only see the shadow, but we do see it from De Niro's perspective. In other words, Pacino turns and the gun, he sees us. He's shooting at us, the audience. And that's pretty clever. At the same time, what's really clever on a completely different level is the fact that we don't mind it, or the audience doesn't mind it. In fact, we know that this is the culmination of the saga. We know that one of them has to go, right? And we do, in a sense, know that De Niro's going to be the one to go because he has no greater. He lives in the moment. He has no greater worldview. He has no beliefs. But that's not really finalized until the end of the film, right? At the same time, we also get this entire book that is about Val Kilmer or Krisha Hurlis, right? We get his character, and he is really the most ruthless character in the film, right? Because we do have a moment. This is before they're about to take down the score, where they realize that they're being trailed by the LAPD. The LAPD. You know what they're looking at? Oh, these guys are good. You know what they're looking at? Us. Okay, motherfucker. Right? He's gone. Bye-bye, motherfucker. Remember he says that? And we realize that, that Krisha Hurlis, or Val Kilmer, is really the... oh, sweet. Also, shouts out to Jason for that $5 donation. Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate you out there, homeboy. Thank you so much. That just came in. I just saw that. If you want to support me, don't forget you can still click those links and drop me a dono. Really appreciate it. But Val Kilmer's character is really the most ruthless character in the film and the book, because we constantly get these descriptions of the fact that he is cold. He's got an ice cold, ice blue stare, and that there are a number of descriptions of when he's looking at a character, he's not looking him in the eye, he's looking at the back of his skull. He looks through people, right? He knows that nobody can get in his way. He won't let them get in his way, and that he has absolute resolve. But it's just like the scene in The Big Takedown where he's walking out, he's smiling, everything's good, and in a flash, he sees the cop with the gun at the other end of the street, and bam, he raises his weapon and he starts blasting. And that's when it all goes to shit. But that's because he is dialed in, he's trained in what his crew is doing, and he is absolutely ruthless. One of the cop characters, I think it's Drucker, describes how when he sees Krisha Hurlis at the end of the book moving through the freeway on foot with the AR by his side, he recognizes his stance and his cold blue, ice cold steel gaze, even in the moonlight, because he remembers it from the LA scene, because he saw this guy moving through the streets with a cold, dead look in his eyes, right? And it's not really a cold, dead look. It's more of a cold, electric look. Neil McCauley, but we sympathize with Tom Sizemore in that one scene, because before the score, De Niro says, "Look, we got to make a decision here. We got to take everything we have. You've got." He says to Tom Sizemore, "You got assets." Right, you've got investments. You've got investments in the Caymans. That's what Van Zandt is doing, by the way. Remember, Van Zandt is a money launderer. So at the beginning of the film, when they rip off the bearer bonds in the truck, they sell them back because his bearer bonds are insured. So they sell them back to him for 40 cents on the dollar and make 60%, right? On top of that. So he has his bearer bonds back, and he's still making 60%, right? And he says to Tom Sizemore, he's like, what do you think? And he's like, Michael, what do you think? And he's like, I'm with you, right? Do you think this is the best thing to do? Do you really? I mean, is this really the best thing to do? And De Niro says, no, man, I'd cut and run. And we sympathize because we realize that he's like a child. He needs his father figure, Neil McCauley, to tell him what to do. But we lose all that cleverly at the end of the film when he uses the human shield, because now he himself is taken a child. So we lose all that, right? We obviously sympathize with Val Kilmer's character because he's got a wife and kid. And what's interesting is that when McCauley meets Edie, right? I see you got a book there. What you read? What you reading? It's a book on metals, right? Metallurgy. It's a book on metals. Oh, stress fractures in titanium. I see that. Lady, who are you? Why are you concerned with what I am or what I do? Right? I'm sorry. I'm from Appalachian, and my family came here in the 1700s. We're Scots Irish. Remember, she says that when they're overlooking the city. He's like, I got a place up here. I see you got a good family. You got a strong, tight family. I see that. And when he said, I mean, that's just such a small line in the film. They're overlooking the city, just like in the cover here. They're overlooking the city, right? The electric blue city, like a grid laid out beneath them, like with all of its currents running straight to him. Oh, also one clever thing is, I didn't realize this until I read the book, is that after they've been surveilled by Al Pacino and the motherfucking LAPD, excuse my language, when they've been surveilled by the LAPD and then they go to talk about it, right? When the crew goes to talk about it, do you notice where they are? They're standing next to an electrical substation. The reason that they do that is because they know that if they are bugged, if there's any surveillance, if they're bugged at all, the static from the substation will cancel out the receiver, right? So everything that it's like the scene in Casino, right? But it's like it's way more high line, as they say in the book, right? Remember in Casino when Nicky Santoro, right? When Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro, like they have, no, it's his it's Joe Pesci's cousin. It's that real life gangster, the one who's in all the films. There's another, the guy, remember the guy in Goodfellas? You want to see helicopters? You want to see helicopters? You know that guy's in Heat also. That guy plays the cop, the uniform cop at the beginning of the film, when they go to investigate the truck robbery scene, right? That's when Ted Levine's character is also sort of mirrored by Nate, right? They're sort of supposed to be mirror images, but remember, Ted Levine's character goes bang, 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 bang. Remember? I knew this guy in grade school. I knew this guy. How's he talk? I knew this guy in grade school. His name was well, forget his name, but he could bend his fingers back and he could turn his eyelids upside down. Remember? Do you know that scene was improvised? That was like Ted Levine's own scene, and that's crazy because he's basically playing. Oh, wasn't she a great big fat girl? Wasn't she a great big fat person? Remember from Silence of the Lambs? That's Ted Levine. Ted Levine was actually offered the role of Waingro in the film, but he turned it down because he was afraid he would be typecast. I mean, good call from Ted Levine, because he really is the same character as Waingro, right? And also, Waingro's character is based on a real guy who was a snitch. He was a connected guy, but he was a snitch in Chicago. And the guy who plays Waingro was also a real life con, and he actually was I think he was locked up in Folsom after that, and everybody called him Waingro. Hey sis, how you doing? Good to see you. That's my sis. Everybody shouts out to my sis out there, the best sister in the world. So yeah. So Waingro, and Jeff pointed out to me earlier, anybody want a piece of pie? After Waingro, you want to fuck with me? Right after he executes the guard for no reason, and De Niro gets pissed at him, and then they go to the little diner, and remember Tom Sizemore is sitting there. He bashes his head against the table, and then Tom Sizemore, right? He does that whole thing. And so we got to go to Nate's and unload. Get rid of this motherfucker. Remember that? And then, but before that, Waingro's sitting there eating like a piece of damn apple pie. Anybody want a piece of pie? Tell him I am a cowboy looking for anything heavy. Right? And then Waingro ends up snitching. And then, of course, he gets the double tap wound, right? And then the coup de grace from Robert De Niro at the end of the film, right in the center of his chest, right, which is pure Andy McNabb, of course. Like I said at the beginning, Andy McNabb, SAS, trained the actors on weapons techniques. And, of course, you hear a bunch of stuff about the film, like how, they show the film at Quantico and all these places to demonstrate proper exfil, OPSEC, and, how fast Val Kilmer is able to change his mags out. And who knows? I mean, who knows if that's true? I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be true. But the fact is that obviously we know from esoteric Hollywood and our boy JD that military and film are tied in with one another, absolutely. And this film is no exception. But yeah, I just think it's interesting going back to the placing the gun scene that we meaning the audience is supposed to subconsciously root for Robert De Niro in the film when at the same time there's a kind of ambivalence in terms of all of these characters. They are likable. They're likable characters, right? Otherwise we wouldn't watch the 3-hour movie. It's a great movie and it's a great book. But the book really fleshes that out in terms of who we're rooting for, right? And why we identify with certain characters. But our sympathy for Vincent Hanna, right, for Al Pacino certainly goes through the roof when he rescues Natalie Portman, right? I'm going to need a vascular surgeon, right? That whole scene, we see that he is, and he kicks the television out the damn car. You can sit here, but you can't watch my motherfucking television, right? Remember that? And his wife also typifies the, she's kind of gothy. She's kind of emo. She's got kind of a 90s Pulp Fiction Cleopatra haircut, living in this postmodernistic dead tech bullshit ex-husband's house. She says I was stoned on Prozac and weed half the time, whatever that means. And she is living with her daughter, but her daughter's been, locked herself in a room all day. She pays no attention to her. She also has no value and no meaning. She doesn't. That's why Hannah resists her, right? Who else in the film? I think that's about it, you guys. We are getting up there, y'all. If you're watching this, especially later, and you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. We're 12 away from 1,000. We are almost at 1,000 subs, and we want to get to 1,000 mainly because we want to have our Caddyshack party. And I just recently, because, you just pluck this stuff from the air, when you're dialed in, you just learn this shit. I just learned some new stuff, excuse my language, about Caddyshack that I did not know. And I thought I knew every damn thing about Caddyshack. But I recently learned some pretty insightful things about Caddyshack from something that I'll share on the stream. Especially about the creation of Caddyshack. So we're going to do our Caddyshack 1,000 subs party as soon as I get up to that 1,000 subs. I'm not doing it early, not till I cross that line, not till I cross that threshold or whatever. So I really appreciate that. That'll just be a fun stream. It won't be literary at all. It'll just be fun. At least I hope. So, yes, please smash the like, leave a comment. If you want to support me, please don't hesitate to hit some of those links there. I'm trying to get down to the fam in Mississippi at the end of the week. I need some, we all do. We all need that gas money. We need our bill money. And thank you for working so hard out there and for being so generous and supporting me. Thank you for watching the stream. I really did love this book. I mean, it was great. I haven't read a prose work of crime fiction like that, especially like that, in a while. I usually try to avoid those books, as I've mentioned before. But I was really pretty happy about that book. I really enjoyed it. I got to say, I mean, it was a real page turner. I tore through that book in a day. So yeah, and also I rewatched Heat today. So yeah, great movie. Great book, fun. Thanks to all my homies out there. Really love you. And also got something coming up with our homeboy Coteasy, Church of the Eternal Logos, David Patrick Harry. We're going to be doing a fun stream, which is completely Spooktober worthy and will be within the bounds of Spooktober because we'll be doing it next week or the week after. I'm not going to say what it is yet, but it's going to be fun. It's a film analysis. I think everybody will enjoy and like, and so that'll be good. So thanks to all my homies out there. Thanks to everybody watching. Really appreciate y'all. That's about all I got. Hope y'all have an awesome day. Thank you for being here for a day stream. All right, peace, y'all.